The courtroom in downtown Brooklyn had never known such a silence. Wooden benches creaked under the shifting weight of reporters, lawyers, and spectators, all craning their necks toward the defense table. The case of the State versus Dorothy Johnson had been routine until that moment, until a voice, soft but piercing, cut through the stillness. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Every head turned, and there he stood, Marcus Johnson, just 8 years old, barely tall enough to see over the table, clutching a frayed blue folder stuffed with papers. His small hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the gravity of what he was about to do. Judge William Carter squinted over his reading glasses, pen frozen mid-sentence. Who are you?" "I'm Marcus Johnson, sir. Dorothy Johnson is my grandmother. I would like to speak on her behalf." The judge blinked. In over 30 years on the bench, Carter had seen everything. Hardened criminals cry, seasoned attorneys crumble, but never an 8-year-old boy asking to enter the lion's den with a folder and a mission. From the prosecutor's table, David Richardson, a man in his 50s with a perfectly tailored suit and a 95% conviction rate, snorted, already half smirking. "This is a courtroom, not a daycare." But Marcus didn't flinch. "She has heart problems," the boy said simply, "and her lawyer quit yesterday. I can't let her do this alone." A low murmur rustled across the courtroom. Dorothy, seated behind her grandson, wiped away a tear. Her hands, calloused from decades of volunteer work, clutched the wooden bench like it was the last anchor she had left. Judge William Carter leaned forward. "You may speak, young man, but only as a witness. This is highly irregular." Richardson opened his mouth to protest, but the judge raised a hand. "Let's hear what he has to say." Marcus nodded once, stepped forward, and opened his folder. Marcus unfolded a page and placed it carefully on the podium. "This," he began, his voice steady and clear, "is a copy of the financial ledger Grandma Dorothy kept every Sunday. She showed me how to check the receipts and mark which ones were income and which were expenses. Blue for income, yellow for bills. I helped every week after dinner." The jury blinked. Some leaned forward. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Richardson arose from his seat, clearly agitated. "Your Honor, we are now treating coloring paper as financial evidence? This is absurd." But Marcus didn't stop him. 3 weeks before the money disappeared, Grandma noticed irregularities in the account. She wrote everything down in this notebook. He pulled out a simple school spiral notebook, its cover peeling. Inside were meticulous notes, dates, company names, and discrepancies, all written in Dorothy's handwriting. Judge Carter raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." Marcus flipped to another page. On September 12th, $2,500 was withdrawn for emergency roof repairs, but the roof didn't need fixing. He pulled out a grainy photograph from an old flip phone. "This is the roof the next day. Still perfect. No signs of any work done." A wave of whispers filled the room. A juror adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. Richardson slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! This is a child playing detective." But Marcus turned to him with a calm, unnerving poise. "Did you investigate that expense, Dr. Richardson?" The prosecutor froze. "That's irrelevant." "No, sir," Marcus replied. "It's essential." He stepped toward the jury. On September 18th, another withdrawal, $1,800 for security equipment, but no cameras were installed. And on September 25th, $3,200 was paid to outside counsel, but my grandmother never hired anyone. Richardson's mouth tightened. Marcus continued, I called the phone numbers of these companies. One didn't exist. The other two never answered. The boy paused, then looked directly at the jury. They weren't real, but someone still got the money. A heavy silence fell. It was no longer a boy telling bedtime stories. It was a witness dismantling the prosecution fact by fact. Dr. Richardson, Marcus said again, did you verify that these companies were legitimate? The prosecutor hesitated. We focused on her role as administrator. It wasn't part of the initial investigation. Judge Carter turned his gaze toward Richardson. So, no verification? Marcus nodded slightly, then spoke with a chilling steadiness. You assumed my grandmother was guilty because you didn't bother to check who actually took the money. The courtroom buzzed, but Marcus remained calm, his small frame barely moving behind the towering podium. He flipped another page with quiet precision. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to explain how I found all this. Judge Carter, now fully leaning forward with his elbows on the bench, gestured gently. Please. Marcus held up a library card. This is my second home, the Bedford Public Library. After Grandma Dorothy was charged, I went there every day after school. I needed to learn how the system works because I knew it was being used to hurt her. Someone in the back gasped softly. And that's where I met Mrs. Patricia Williams, a retired paralegal who used to work in law offices for over 30 years. She helped me understand how evidence works, what prosecutors are supposed to do, and how to ask the right questions. In the gallery, a silver-haired black woman in her 60s looked down proudly but modestly. Her eyes shimmered. She taught me something important, Marcus said, that in court, you don't win by being loud, you win by being prepared. He turned another page and held up a sheet. These are the forged signatures on the expense authorizations. Grandma Dorothy's real signature is gentle, round strokes, slow curves. But these ones? Heavy pressure, sharp corners, rushed. I compared them at the library using handwriting guides. Richardson stood up, livid. Now we're accepting forgery analysis from a third grader? Marcus turned toward him calmly. Dr. Richardson, do you have a certified expert's report proving those signatures are authentic? Richardson opened his mouth, then closed it. The courtroom was utterly still. I didn't think so, Marcus said, then turned back to the judge, which means there's no legal proof that my grandmother signed anything. The judge slowly set down his pen. That's when Marcus reached into his folder again and this time pulled out 2 more documents. This is a call log from the bank. It shows that someone called the community programs account at exactly 2:30 p.m. on the day the first large withdrawal was made. The call lasted 15 minutes. Then he held up the second paper, a hospital record. This is from Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. On that exact day, at that exact time, Grandma Dorothy was with me. I had an asthma attack. She was by my side in the emergency room for 4 hours. There's no way she could have made that call or authorized that transaction. A ripple moved through the jury box. Judge Carter sat back slowly, his brow furrowed in disbelief. Why was none of this brought forward earlier? Marcus looked up. Because her lawyer quit, and because nobody believed a poor black woman had anything worth defending. Judge Carter's fingers drummed slowly on the bench. David Richardson sat stiffly, his carefully pressed suit now clinging awkwardly under the pressure of scrutiny. He dabbed his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief, but it did little to hide the beads of sweat gathering there. Marcus cleared his throat and opened a new section of the folder, this time a sealed envelope. "What I'm about to show you, Your Honor, is difficult," he said, his voice a degree more serious, "but necessary." He gently pulled out a small audio recorder, the kind found in office supply stores, and pressed the play button. "Tony, I need you to speed up this case with the old woman on welfare. Doesn't matter if she's guilty or not, my conviction rate can't take a dip before the Attorney General's election." The voice was unmistakable. David Richardson. Gasps erupted from the gallery. One juror audibly whispered, "Oh my God." A second voice followed on the recording. "Rick, are you sure? What if it backfires?" "It's an old black woman. Nobody's going to care. The jury will make up their mind before they sit down." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Richardson surged to his feet, eyes wide with panic. "Objection! Objection, Your Honor! This is entrapment! That recording is illegal!" Marcus didn't even look at him. He addressed the judge with quiet, devastating confidence. "No, sir. It's legal. The conversation was recorded on a public office line, which has a posted warning about calls being monitored for transparency. Mrs. Patricia helped me verify that." The judge's jaw tightened. "Is this true?" Marcus handed over a printout of the office policy, highlighted in yellow. "Yes, Your Honor. And I also have the building manager's signed statement confirming that Mr. Richardson knew the policy." The judge took the papers, his eyes scanning them quickly. When he looked up, something had shifted. The restraint in his face was gone. Now there was fury. But Marcus wasn't done. "And I also have this." He held up a printed text message. "It's from Mr. Richardson to his assistant, dated 3 days after that call." He read aloud, "Only focus on Dorothy's administrative liability. No need to waste time checking vendors or cameras. Wrap it in 2 weeks max." The jury's faces twisted, no longer in confusion, but in revulsion. The mask had slipped, and what lay beneath was not incompetence, it was calculated manipulation. Richardson tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He reached for his water glass with a trembling hand and spilled half of it on his notes. "And this," Marcus continued, pulling the final sheet, "is Dr. Richardson's bank statement. 3 days after Grandma was charged, he received a $25,000 deposit from a shell company linked to one of the fake vendors." A thunderous wave of gasps swept through the room. "The same company," Marcus added, "that supposedly repaired the roof that didn't need fixing." Judge Carter's gavel struck once, then again, louder. He didn't speak immediately. His eyes were locked on Richardson, who now sat pale, hollow-eyed, and shaking. The courtroom felt like it had frozen in time. Judge Carter gripped the bench tightly, his gaze now icy. The jurors stared, as if awaiting confirmation that they weren't dreaming. Richardson, the golden boy of white-collar prosecutions, sat wordless, a crumpled version of the man who entered the room just an hour ago, confident, smug, untouchable. But now touch had arrived, and it came in the form of an 8-year-old boy. "Mr. Richardson," the judge said, his voice gravelly, shaking with restrained fury, "do you have a response to these allegations?" Richardson opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Instead, it was Dorothy Johnson who slowly rose to her feet. She had remained silent throughout her grandson's testimony, her presence quiet but steady. Now, standing before the entire court, she seemed taller than she had been just moments ago. "For 15 years, I gave everything I had to the Bedford-Stuyvesant housing program. I've walked in every single apartment we helped secure for families. I've held the hands of mothers who were one eviction away from the street. I've watched children like Marcus, children with no one, find safety in the homes we built." Her voice cracked slightly. "And you," she said, turning to Richardson, "tried to destroy all of that for political gain." Richardson bowed his head, as if trying to disappear inside his own suit. Dorothy's eyes turned to the jury. "You weren't just being asked to judge me today. You were being asked to believe that my age and my race made me incapable of honesty, that my service meant nothing, that my family didn't matter." She looked back at Marcus, who stood silent now, hands folded, watching her with wide, reverent eyes. "I didn't teach him the law to win. I taught him the law so he'd never have to feel small again, because knowledge gives you that, and love gives you the strength to use it." Judge Carter stood. The entire courtroom did the same, except Richardson, who remained seated, visibly shaking. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a presentation of evidence this precise, this thorough, and this damning. Marcus Johnson, you may be the youngest witness this courtroom has ever seen, but you may also be the most impactful." He turned. "All charges against Dorothy Johnson are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the State Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation into prosecutorial misconduct, criminal conspiracy, and financial fraud." The room erupted, not in gasps, but in applause. Real, thunderous, cathartic applause. Security escorted Richardson from the courtroom as reporters leapt from benches snapping photos. One camera caught Marcus reaching up to hold Dorothy's hand as they stood at the center of it all. Two people no one had believed in, now symbols of truth too bright to ignore. 6 days later, Marcus Johnson's face was on the front page of every major newspaper in America. The boy who defended justice. 8-year-old exposes corrupt prosecutor. From kitchen table to courtroom, a child saves his grandmother. Cable news anchors replayed courtroom footage on a loop. Legal scholars debated the implications. Civil rights activists hailed Marcus as a symbol of a new generation. Talk shows, morning programs, even late-night comedians praised his calm brilliance, his unshakable poise. But Marcus? He was still a child. When a CNN reporter asked what he wanted to do next, he shrugged and said, "I want to go back to school. I have a science quiz next week." Behind the scenes, however, real change had begun. New York State's Attorney General launched a full investigation into David Richardson, uncovering a string of similar cases where poor and minority defendants had been railroaded for the sake of his perfect conviction record. Within 2 months, Richardson had been indicted on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accepting bribes. Disbarred permanently. Sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. But Marcus never gloated. When asked if he was happy to see Richardson punished, he simply said, "I feel sorry for him, not because he got caught, but because he chose power over people." The Marcus Law was passed in New York State within 6 months of the trial. It required prosecutors in grand larceny and fraud cases to present concrete evidence of a defendant's physical presence at the time of the alleged crime. Other states soon began drafting similar laws. Legal scholars called it the most significant child-led justice reform in state history. Meanwhile, Marcus and Dorothy returned to their quiet life in Brooklyn, but it would never be the same. Dorothy was named Brooklyn Citizen of the Year. She used her platform to campaign for housing transparency and legal equity in underserved communities. She spoke at city councils, advocacy groups, and universities. Marcus, with help from Mrs. Patricia and a group of local educators, launched the Marcus Project, a free volunteer-led program that taught legal literacy to children in public schools. What began as a single workshop in Brooklyn soon expanded to 25 schools across the state. "If kids like me know their rights," Marcus told a crowd of students one afternoon, "they won't be afraid when someone tries to take them away." It was a brisk spring morning when Marcus Johnson, now 9 years old, walked into the lecture hall at Columbia Law School, not as a student, but as a guest speaker. The auditorium was packed. Over 300 law students, professors, and legal professionals had gathered to hear from the boy who had shaken the pillars of courtroom tradition with nothing but a folder, a notebook, and unrelenting love. The dean introduced him with a voice full of awe. "Today, we're not just here to talk about precedent, we're here to witness it." Marcus stepped up to the podium in a neatly pressed blazer, still a size too big, and clutched his now famous blue folder, the same one he had carried into the Brooklyn courthouse. He didn't read from notes. He didn't need to. Everyone thinks justice is about winning, but it's not. Real justice happens when someone you love is being hurt, and you stand between them and the thing trying to destroy them. The room was silent. "I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth the way Grandma taught me, and I asked questions, the kinds of questions no one else had bothered to ask." A student raised her hand. "Do you want to be a lawyer when you grow up?" Marcus smiled. "Maybe. I don't know yet. But I know this. I want to help people who feel small, like I used to, because when you know the law, you don't feel small anymore." After the lecture, students swarmed to shake his hand, professors asked for photos, and 3 prestigious law firms approached Dorothy with a single message. "When he's ready, we'll cover his entire education, full ride, wherever he wants to go." But back home, Marcus was still just a kid. He played basketball in the street with his friends. He watched cartoons every Saturday morning. He argued with Dorothy over eating his vegetables. And yet there was something unshakable inside him now, a quiet fire, a purpose that would not fade with fame or attention. Dorothy, too, had changed. Her health improved dramatically as the stress of the charges lifted. She had been invited to join a city oversight council on public housing programs, helping craft reforms to prevent the very kind of fraud that nearly destroyed her. She accepted. "My grandson showed me," she told a local news station, "that our age does not limit our wisdom, and our color does not limit our value. Justice must be reminded sometimes of its own principles." 6 months after the trial, the Bedford-Stuyvesant housing program, once nearly destroyed by scandal, had become a national model. Under transparent management and backed by record donations, it expanded to help hundreds more families. Dorothy was invited to consult with other cities. And wherever she went, Marcus was by her side, his blue folder now worn with time, but treated like sacred text. One afternoon, during a visit to a new community center in Newark, a reporter approached Marcus with a smile. "What's the biggest lesson you took from all this?" Marcus thought for a long time. Then he said, "That the system can be fair, but only if you're ready to fight for what's right. And sometimes fighting just means asking the questions no one else dares to." Meanwhile, David Richardson sat in a small county jail in upstate New York. Convicted of prosecutorial misconduct, conspiracy to defraud, and accepting bribes, his empire had crumbled in less than a year. His license to practice law was gone. His political career, a ruin. Now he worked quietly as an insurance salesman in a town where no one knew or cared about who he used to be. He wrote letters to Dorothy, apology after apology. She never replied, not out of spite, but because she no longer lived in the past. As she told Marcus one night over dinner, "Some wounds don't need forgiveness, they need justice, and we got ours." Back in Brooklyn, Judge Carter had framed a photo of the courtroom moment when Marcus stood alone at the podium, folder in hand, eyes ablaze. He placed it on his desk. "To remind me," he often said, "that justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears sneakers and carries a spiral notebook." He changed the way he presided, more cautious, more investigative, more human. And every law clerk he hired was required to study the Johnson case. At age 10, Marcus watched from the front row of a televised legislative session as the Marcus Law was expanded nationally, requiring that in financial crimes, prosecutors present not just circumstantial assumptions, but tangible evidence of willful intent and presence. It was the first federal justice reform to bear the name of a child. In a quiet corner of the Brooklyn Public Library, a new program was unveiled that fall. The Marcus Project, Know Your Rights, Know Your Power. With Mrs. Patricia Williams at the helm, it taught children how to understand legal documents, speak in public, and stand up for what they believed in. Hundreds enrolled in the first semester. Marcus was there on opening day, watching from the back, hands folded, smiling. He didn't just save his grandmother, Mrs. Patricia later told a journalist. He reminded us all why we got into law in the first place. And so the story of Marcus Johnson, the boy who stood alone in a courtroom full of prejudice, became more than a headline. It became a spark, a reminder that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly, with trembling hands, armed only with love, memory, and the quiet defiance of a heart that refuses to give up. Years later, when Marcus was asked once again whether he planned to become a lawyer, he gave the same answer. "I'm not sure, but I know I'll always fight for people who don't have a voice, because Grandma taught me something I'll never forget. Knowledge is power, but love is courage." And in that combination, truth, love, and a child's unwavering belief in what's right, he changed the world.